So this is the part in our day, in our agenda, where if we were gathering in person, we'd be starting to go into our breakout sessions. And we'd be asking everyone to break into smaller groups to hear from various STEM leaders, and you'd be going around listening to those messages. Given our virtual situation, we will offer one breakout session today live, and we're going to be moving into that next. You will then receive an email granting you access to the additional breakout sessions that have been videotaped prior, that you can listen to and watch this afternoon or at the guidance of your educator, teacher, whomever you're working with. So right now, I'd like to get into that breakout session. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Abigail Kohler, who's a recent graduate of Brown University and co-founder and CEO at Rushy Tech. Welcome, Abigail, and looking forward to hearing about your professional journey.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Abby Kohler, and I am very happy to be here and show you what I'm working on. And if you have any questions while I'm talking, please put them in the chat. I've left some time for questions at the end, so hopefully I'll have time to get to all of them. So I co-founded Ressuscitech while I was a junior at Brown with the simple goal of improving how people do CPR. And that goal has since transformed into and evolved into a mission to give people the power to save someone's life and enable them to take action in emergency situations through both training and real-time feedback. Next slide. So I'm sure many of you know what CPR is, but as a quick summary, your heart actually has electrical signals that communicate to the muscles in your heart. And these communication signals tell these muscles to contract, which pumps blood and nutrients through the body. And when someone has a sudden cardiac arrest, those electrical signals don't function properly, which means that the muscles don't receive this communication and they don't contract, so they don't pump blood, and your brain doesn't get any oxygen or nutrients, and your other vital organs don't get oxygen and nutrients. So how CPR helps with this if someone goes into a cardiac arrest is that CPR is physical chest compression. So they pump your heart from the outside and help pump blood throughout your body, including your brain, to keep your organs viable and alive before a thing called a defibrillator can be used to electrically restart your heart. So CPR is very, very important because it can keep someone alive before first responders come or before a defibrillator can be accessed. Next slide, please. And learning CPR is a very, very important skill, and many people are required to learn it, and even many people who aren't required to still want to learn it so that they have this life-saving skill on hand in case they need it. But CPR training is pretty time-consuming. It often takes up an entire day, and it can be expensive, making it out of reach for some people. And also, people tend to forget the information. It's like trying to remember everything you learned in just one day of school, maybe a year or 2 years ago. That would be really, really hard to do. So, and if people forget this information, then they might do CPR incorrectly. So this design of CPR classes could be improved upon. Next slide. So that's why we have developed the Smart Certification Feedback app. It's an app on your phone where you can just watch short, informative videos, take quick quizzes, and then, next slide, practice your compressions. On this screen, you can see I'm just holding the phone in my hand in CPR position, compressing, and then you get actual feedback on your chest compressions that tells you whether they're at the proper depth and at the proper rate or speed. So with our app, you can get skills evaluation during CPR and then get certified so that people know and you know that you can properly administer chest compressions if someone has a cardiac arrest. And you can also revisit the info anytime because it's in an app that's in your pocket. So it's like having a trainer available to you, like having a trainer in your pocket at all times. So at Ressuscitech, we want to tackle CPR quality from two angles, with both training and with real medical devices. So, quick warning, on the next slide, there is a medical image. It's not bloody or gross, but if you don't want to see it, turn away for maybe a minute or so. So next slide. So in hospital, doctors and nurses have fancy equipment, and one of these pieces of equipment actually gives CPR feedback. And doctors and nurses rely on that feedback in order to perform chest compressions properly. And this really works. Next slide. More than 60% of people survive in hospital cardiac arrests. And this is different out of hospital, where people have no access to equipment and compression can be done wrong. And some people lack the confidence to try doing CPR and try doing chest compressions at all. So we also want to take the tech that's available in hospital and then make it accessible out of hospital, where cardiac arrests are more frequent and more deadly. So next slide. That's why we're also developing the CPR Now feedback app to give people access to CPR feedback with just their phones for out-of-hospital cardiac arrests. It's the exact same feedback that we have put in our training app, except we're using it in a separate actual medical device smartphone app, where people will still get feedback on their depth and rate of chest compressions, and they can know that they're giving people the best possible quality of care. So in clinical settings like hospitals, other feedback devices nearly triple survival rates. So we hope to see similar success when we make our app available. Next slide. My company has received a lot of support and has experienced some early success. We participated in some business accelerators, which are these programs that are designed to help young companies like mine get started and grow and become successful. So some of these are listed on this slide, like B-Lab, which is an accelerator at Brown, Mass Challenge and Driven, which we're currently in. And then we were recently accepted into the American Heart Association's own Empowered to Serve Accelerator, which we're really excited to be participating in. We've also won some funding from the organizations you've seen below. We won first place in the MedTech track of the Rhode Island Business Competition just this year. So we've received a lot of support. So I want this to be a reminder to ask for help and ask for support and not be frustrated if you don't get a yes right away. My company actually applied to the Rhode Island Business Competition the year before we won, and we didn't even get into the first round. It was just a flat out no. And then we ended up winning first place in the MedTech track just 1 year later. So a no can turn into a yes, and a no can also, in some ways, motivate you to try to be better and improve. So don't get discouraged and don't get frustrated. Next slide. So here's a quick timeline just to give you a better sense of where my company is currently at and where we're going. So we are currently testing and refining Smart Certification, that training app that I described, and planning to launch it very soon. And then for the medical app for real-time emergencies, we have to go through a process to get cleared by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, who also regulates medical devices. So this process is fairly long and involves a lot of stuff, all of which you see on this timeline. And we hope to make that app available in June of 2022. So I want to point out that sometimes things in STEM happen really fast and are just very quick to develop, but sometimes development and research can seem a bit slow, like having a planned launch date in June of 2022. But even if progress seems slow, there are a lot of exciting steps along the way, and it's very interesting and exciting to be part of a research and development timeline, even if the ultimate result seems very far off. Next slide. So this is the team behind this project. My co-founder, Greg Fine, and I started this company in 2018, in October of 2018, so 2 years ago. And we also recently brought on a chief medical officer just this summer. So I'm definitely not doing this alone, and it's very, very important that you find a team when you're working on something and people to support you and work alongside you. Next slide. So a little bit more about me. I'm 22. I studied at Brown University. I studied biomedical engineering and I just graduated in May of 2020. I co-founded Resuscitech in 2018, and I grew up in Newtown, Connecticut, and I currently live in Providence, Rhode Island. I have loved STEM pretty much all my life. I loved science classes and math classes in school, and I knew from a pretty young age that I wanted to be an engineer. But even if you don't love STEM or it's just a slight interest, you never know when an interest might blossom into a passion and a career for you to pursue. So keep at it. And next slide. Some of the other projects I worked in while in school were 3D printing prosthetics, and I also worked on augmented reality anatomy study tools. I also did not do these alone. There were teams behind all of this. And I know sometimes STEM is perceived as being a really cutthroat field to pursue, but that hasn't been my experience at all. And I think these examples really highlight that there's lots of collaboration in the field, and you can ask for help and you can find people with different skills and work with them and learn from them. Next slide. So there's a reason that events like these exist. It's really important that women go into STEM and that more women go into STEM. Many things in the world were designed and engineered mostly or entirely by men. And even when they had the intention to design for everyone, women included, there are real meaningful consequences when a room full of designers and engineers only includes men. These consequences include things like medications that were designed for men and don't work quite as well for women. Cars that aren't as safe for women because they weren't designed with women's bodies in mind. Medical devices that don't work as well for women as they do for men, and so many more. So there are actual real consequences of having women in STEM and having women make decisions in the room. So when more women go into STEM, design and engineering teams become more diverse. And diverse teams build more inclusive technology that works for everyone, both men and women. Okay, next slide. And there are a lot of resources, free and cheap resources to start learning STEM, including Khan Academy. Khan Academy is actually where I first learned to code. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it, but it's a really, really great resource. There's also Code Academy, which has free coding tutorials and classes. And then edX and Coursera also have a lot of free courses and resources to learn STEM and learn about whatever you're interested in. They are really comprehensive, and no matter what niche of STEM you find interesting, you can find something on there. There's also Arduino and Raspberry Pi, which if you're interested in electrical engineering, circuitry, engineering in general, coding, you can definitely take advantage of those resources. They're pretty cheap. I think the cheapest Arduino I know of is either $10 or $20. So if that's within your budget, they're very accessible, and there's a lot of tutorials online teaching you how to use them. And you can build some really, really neat things. And they're actually tools that are so robust that we used them in college to build devices. So you can get your hands on some really robust engineering materials, which is really, really neat. And I'd also like to point out that all of the tools that my company used for the early development and testing of our products were all free tools. We actually didn't use any paid tools. So I think it really illustrates that if you have access to a computer and the internet, you can do a lot of really neat and really exciting things. So I would highly recommend taking advantage of some of these resources. One that I've neglected to mention on here, but I'll say right now, is MIT OpenCourseWare. They have a lot of really exciting, really interesting STEM materials. Okay, next slide. Okay. Thank you guys so much, and I'm happy to answer some questions now. Okay.
So we do have some questions that came into the chat, Abby. So if you don't mind, I'll shoot these out to you. So the first one is a two-part question. Was there ever a point where you almost gave up in creating your new organization? And do you have any tips on what to do when you're working on a project and you get stuck?
I think my number one tip is ask for help. There are a lot of people who want to help you, and don't be shy in asking for help. The worst they can say is no, or I guess just not answer. But just keep looking for mentors and supporters and people to help you. So that's piece of advice number one. And were there any times that I personally got stuck? Definitely. Tons of them. They still happen. Any times I almost gave up, I would say probably no. The kind of thought in my head at each time I got stuck was that it was just a new barrier that I had to overcome, no matter how long that took. There was, I suppose, almost one moment where it did cross my mind. And we actually were originally building a hardware device, not a smartphone app. And that, when we were making that switch, it definitely crossed my mind, but the overwhelming thought was to persevere. I think having conviction and being dedicated is one of the most important things you can have.
Great. Did you always know you wanted to be an engineer?
I have known for a very long time that I wanted to be an engineer. I think I've thought that I wanted to be an engineer since I was in middle school. But there are plenty of people who I know who didn't know they wanted to be an engineer till college even. So no matter at what stage you find engineering, it's definitely a good field to be in. So you can really decide you want to pursue engineering at any time. You don't have to know now or even when you get to college.
So next question's in line with that. Who or what inspired you to follow this path?
So there were a lot of things that inspired me. I would say definitely my grandfather, who was an entrepreneur, made me think that I might be capable of starting a company. And there are tons of inspiring women in STEM who I loved to read about. As a kid, I took a lot of inspiration from characters in books. If anyone's read the series of Unfortunate Events, Violet Baudelaire was one of the major characters that made me inspired to study engineering and to think about engineering as a career path, because she was a builder and an innovator in the books. And then, plenty of real life examples too. Like I always loved reading about Marie Curie and Millie Dresselhaus and plenty of other just inspiring women in STEM. So I think finding role models is very important.
That's great. So when you were studying at Brown, were there a lot of other girls in your classes? What was the mix, would you say?
So it definitely depended on the classes. I would say at the beginning, it was probably close to 50-50, maybe 40-60, 40% women, 60% men. And then as time went on, that definitely changed. There were classes I was in by my senior year that had maybe only 2 or 3 women in them, and then 10 to 20 men. That was pretty typical by the end of my time at Brown. But that's definitely subject to change, and there were definitely classes that broke that mold, which is exciting.
So in your current role within your organization, do you like your job?
I love my job. I would not trade it for anything. It's so exciting. I think one of the best parts about what I'm doing is that every bit of progress that I make is towards a goal that I really, really believe in. I think, and I created the mission and vision for my company, so it's all things that I am very personally dedicated to achieving. So I feel a huge amount of personal responsibility in my work. which is very motivating and is something I really, really love. And again, wouldn't trade for anything. So I love my job.
That's great. So we have a little bit of a technical question here.
Sure.
How do you know if someone goes into cardiac arrest? What are the signs?
Yeah. So there are a couple initial steps to follow if someone's having an emergency. You should first and foremost check if someone is responsive. So also, if you're interested in this, you should totally take a CPR class. There are tons of them available, and my app will even be available soon. But basic steps, you should check for responsiveness. So that means seeing if someone responds to like stimuli. So, you tap the person very firmly on the shoulder and see if they have, see if they respond to that. You also should yell pretty loudly at the person, ask if they're okay. And if they're completely unresponsive, meaning, they don't move in response to any of that, they don't speak, completely unresponsive and out, then you should check for breathing. And it's how you do that is a little bit technical, so you probably would want to get some practice, or learn a little bit more about it. But in basic terms, you can tilt someone's head back a bit and open their mouth to see, not very much, just a little bit, and see if they're breathing. Also see if their chest rises and falls, and also feel. So putting your cheek up against the person's nose or mouth once you've tilted their head back, to see if you feel any breathing. So if someone is unresponsive and not breathing, that's when you know that you need to perform CPR. And again, you should totally take a CPR training class if you want to know more about this, because you have to perform chest compressions in a very particular way that involves compressing 2 to 2.4 inches deep into the chest at a rate of 100 to 120 times per minute. So it's definitely something you need to be trained on in order to know how to do properly. But if someone does have a cardiac arrest, the general rule is push hard and fast.
That's great. And I'd just like you to know, Abby, that I am CPR certified, and I see extreme value in it. And it was such a great experience to go through, and the class is actually really hands-on and really fun. So I encourage everyone to take it. You never know when you're going to come upon an experience that you may need to use those skills. So I have one last question for you here, Abby.
Fantastic.
If you could share one bit of wisdom with the girls participating in STEM today, what would it be?
I think my biggest piece of wisdom really is find mentors, find people who will support you in your educational journey and in your career, because those mentors are really the people you look towards when something isn't quite going the way you want it to, and they're the people who will support you through that. So it really just comes down to ask for help, ask for mentorship. The worst someone can say is no, or just not respond, and just keep asking. I know that in the panel, people talked about networking a little bit, but it is very important to grow your network and find a mentor. So that is my biggest piece of advice. I would say my other piece of advice is, really pursue what you're passionate about and what you're interested in. I really, truly believe that the most powerful thing you can have is passion and conviction and dedication. So, try to expand your interests outside of school. Try to, learn as much as you can, take on other classes like with some of the resources I mentioned before, like looking at MIT OpenCourseWare or edX or Khan Academy or Code Academy, and really try to live your passions outside of school. If I was strictly doing what I was learning in school, I wouldn't have learned to code when I did. It wouldn't have sparked that initial interest nearly as much. So I think really trying to live your passions is another piece of advice I can offer.
I agree. Living your passion. When you love what you're doing, it's not really a job. It's part of who you are, and it's part of your life. So, Abby, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. And we wish you all the best as you work to revolutionize medicine. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Bye.
I would like to take the opportunity to thank all of the volunteer leaders for spending time with us today. Oh, I just realized my video is not on. So hang on one quick sec. I almost made it the entire presentation without technical difficulties. Sorry about that. I do want to, again, take time to thank all the volunteer leaders for spending time with us this morning, for all the preparation that went into putting on this event. Thank you to the educators for allowing your students to be part of the program or to listen in on the pre-recorded program. And thank you, most importantly, to our students for spending your morning learning and exploring with us. I'd also like to, again, recognize our event sponsors, Amgen, CompuClaim, and Trilix, as this event would not be possible without their support. Please remember to check your email for access to those additional amazing breakout sessions that you can enjoy either this afternoon or at a more convenient time. I want to personally thank you from the group and from the entire staff that helped put this together, and we hope everyone has a very successful school year. Thank you again. Goodbye.